John Summers is the motoring historian. He was a company car thrashing technology sales rep that turned into a fairly inept sports bike rider. Hailing from California, he collects cars and bikes built with plenty of cheap and fast, and not much reliable. On his show, he gets together with various co hosts to talk about new and old cars, driving, motorbikes, motor racing, and motoring travel.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon. It is John Summers, the motoring historian. Rather than saving this particular topic up for an episode, I thought, you know what, I'll just lay this down real quickly because this already took place a couple of weeks ago, and I'm in danger of sort of forgetting the wrinkles of the process that led me up to this rather unusual situation of me buying a Toyota. Yeah, there I said it. It's I almost can't get it out. I mean, a few years ago when Toyota lost Le Mans on the very last lap after 24 hours of racing, and it would have been their first time winning. And I was pleased for Porsche. I'm not a Toyota fan. I respected them from the time that I visited the town in Japan, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But my God, yeah, I bought a Toyota Tundra. I feel it's like a confessional, right? And this is why this piece has to be like a standalone. For the longest time, I was looking at Rams. I've always had a thing about Rams because, what I always do and what I have to step away from when I'm making a sensible purchase like this is I always go to the nth degree. No, I don't buy a sports bike. It has to be the Lita sports bike. I don't buy a Lita sports bike that's in good condition. No, I'll buy the cheapest, most wrecked one I can possibly find. That's the way that I seem to have done things, certainly since I came to the States, because of the whole thing of no MOT, so you can get away with ancillaries, cars, on cars, things like wipers and things like that not working. I mean, for American audience in Britain, any switches that the car has on the dashboard, they have to work. So if it has spotlights, it doesn't matter if it has a switch for spotlights, even if it has the spotlights taken out of it, that's still an MOT fail, and that means you can't register the car and use it that year. So so here in California, we have smog, right? So it has to pass emissions if it's older than a 1975. But there are all that means is you have to you kind of hot rodded it, right? That's not a test of how good the lights are or the brakes are or whether or not the windshield's got a massive crack in it, as our Mercedes has got at the moment. So it really is. Pardon me, it really is the land of the free, and I realized that when I first came here. It's not a coincidence that California is where they invented the hot rod, and the hot rod is a vehicle that doesn't have mud guards because it doesn't rain, so why would you need it? You're not driving through mud, it's not splashing up on you. It doesn't have windscreen wipers, it doesn't have a windshield. If you think about the quintessential high boy hot rod, if you think about the Hells Angels, that's a lifestyle that's predicated on the weather being all right. You couldn't be a Hells Angel in Norway, could you? It's bloody freezing. There's going to be loads of Hells Angels from Norway writing to me now. But you understand the concept that, I'm saying that it's lifestyle of living on the road as a biker or hot rods without roofs. This is or weather protection. This is a function of California, and primarily Southern California's great weather. But the Toyota truck is also a function of California, right? This one I've bought, it was built in Texas, right? It has a 350 cubic inch V8, if you said that normally, built in Texas, 350 inch cubic 350 cubic inch V8, you would think I was talking about a domestic pickup truck, wouldn't you? And that's really how I arrived here. The morning I set out to look at the one that I ended up buying, I planned to look at another truck earlier in the day. That was a Chevy. It was 2 years newer. It had done 60,000 miles less, but I just thought, for raw value. So look, let's position this truck properly. It's a 2016 Tundra Limited. Limited, I guess, is the gussied up one. It has a leather interior. It has heated seats, which are the two features that my wife and son were keen for. I've done like 1,200, 1,300 miles in it, long journeys, running around town, towed with it already. It has cruise control. That works superbly on hills. It's towed the heaviest car that I'm likely to want to tow with it. Just about the heaviest car. Maybe the Pontiac's heavier than the Mercedes, but I towed the Mercedes with it home from the dealership that I bought it. And just whilst I think of that, Toyota of Clovis was the dealership, and shout out to them. It was a pleasant experience dealing with them. Yeah, so it's a limited, I guess, which isn't like the TRD, like whatever, but it's got like the chrome grille and it's got chrome wheels, which is a little gussied up for me, frankly. But, it's a Tundra, so, it's not that gussied up. And fundamentally, I found myself saying to somebody, can't remember who, I feel like when you buy a Toyota pickup in California, it's almost like buying a pair of flip-flops or buying a hoodie. It's sort of part of a California car guy sort of uniform, or California dude kind of uniform. So yeah, so I was looking at the Rams for the longest time. Those of you that know me well will know that probably 5, 6, maybe even 10 years ago, I was looking at those V10 Rams, the ones that had the Viper engine. If you don't know about them, just Google them. I think they were called the SRT10. I was close to buying one, but didn't, just because, they're just a bit bloody stupid, aren't they? Just a high revving race motor in a pickup truck. It's just a bit like, it's just a bit of a silly thing. So I drove one, and it was thuggish. The salesman kept on wanting me to do a burnout in it, and that kind of put me off it. Because that's kind of all it's good for. That's the implication, and the gas mileage is terrible. And I was planning to use it as a daily driver, and I just didn't want to would be there with. Around town it does like 8 to 10, like really bad gas mileage. Which, if you stop and think about it, you think, well, is that much worse than this Tundra that does like 15 to 16? Well, yeah, it is. It really is. It's the Tundra is 50% better. Now, I agree that in comparison, in this place of European cars that are regularly doing 40, 50, 60, maybe even more than that miles to the gallon, then this 15 to 16 for this Tundra is pretty bad. So how do I arrive at it? Well, so I pivoted from the V10 Rams to then feeling like I'd always wanted a dual wheel truck, and the Rams of recent years have not only had more power than the Fords and the Chevys, but they've also had the dual wheels encased in this sort of swoopy bodywork. I bloody loved it. The 2018s, 2016, 17, 18s, they sort of did a leaning forward look on the grille. Looked really good. 2019, they did a grille which I wasn't sure about at first. Now I like it, but I wasn't sure about it at first. But in 2019, they introduced a model that had 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. Well, when I was looking at trucks, I realized that those trucks, a lot of them, are used for car hauling. And what they can do with a gooseneck trailer, it's like if you imagine a flatbed, it's just like an open car trailer, but a gooseneck, so it's attached in the middle of the bed with 1, 2, 3 cars parked on the trailer, chained down. These things tow across the country. I believe there's a whole raft of business that these massive torque and horsepower Rams, particularly other Dualies as well, Fords more than Chevys, but particularly these Rams have opened up a whole kind of business where you can, go in your local Dodge dealer, buy a truck like it's a personal car, and then set up a business that can tow. So you can tell by the tone of my voice how cool I think these 1,000-foot-pound trucks are. You need to do at Christmas time I was on the brink of buying one before I realized that not all trucks, not all Dually diesel Rams are created equal. They are not. Some have the 68 RFE Chrysler transmission, others have the Asian, Aishin, Aisin, AISIN. Have a colleague or mentor at Stanford who did some consultancy work for them, and it was crazy how he was doing consultancy work for them, and I had said, had I ever heard of them? And here was me researching why I needed a truck with that transmission rather than the Chrysler one. I actually understand there've been recalls around each of them, but this didn't put me off the truck, and I realized that I could get into one for 25 for a super high mile one, 30 for a 200,000 ish mile one, and mid 30s if you wanted to just do them just ticked over 100,000 miles. So clearly that mid 30s truck is probably the best price point. In fact, spending 40 on one that's done less than 100,000 miles, like a 2019 or a 2020, is actually probably your best value for those trucks. But I'm just like $40,000 for a pickup truck. I just couldn't bloody do it. So I was looking at the 35 range, but it's still a lot of money for a pickup truck. That's what I'm excited about, because it's got this amazing torque statistic. I mean, am I ever gonna use that? I mean, it just seemed a bit anyway. So it was the waters were further muddied by the fact that last summer the truck that we had for a road trip, for our Route 66 road trip, there's another pod about that, was me and my son, was a F-250. He loved the Super Duty thing about it. He loved the towing mirrors as well. And it had a 6.2 gas motor, which I understand is absolutely bulletproof. That's what they say. It's very much, but it's like a work truck. And my wife was like, "Oh, I'd like leather. If it's going to be like our money, I'd like it to be leather." And I'm thinking to myself, that's not unreasonable, is it? That's not an unreasonable ask. She's like, she's but you to try and find, the Lariat ones, gussied up wheels, didn't like that. Rare. You're spending, like, on a 20 grand truck, you're spending like 25 to get a Lariat one with the same miles. And you're looking at, this would be like, we're in 2024 now. This would be like a 2015, 2016 truck that's going to have 200,000 miles on it. And I'm just like, a gas one, not a diesel one, a gas one. Diesel ones are more. Diesel Ford's terrible reputation for reliability, but it doesn't seem to hurt the values. Yeah, so I was all about the Rams, and I was in and I was out, and probably a year went by, and I had, I've had 2 trucks inspected by, Lemon Squad. So there was one in Dallas that I was interested in, where, and my thought was that the inspector would look at it, and that would include photos, and he would test drive it. So if it was good, I could, if it seemed right, I could negotiate a price, fly into town. I'm not spending $20,000, $30,000 on a vehicle unless I'd bloody well driven it, right? Fly into town, drive it, and, but this Ram that they looked at, the price was good on it. And of course you get what you pay for, don't you? It pulled to one side, it had scrubbed the tires, it hard shifted at 40 miles an hour, which I understand is an Asian kind of thing, but like I'm not. It just like it had just been used like a work truck, and so I didn't. I walked away from that one, went cold on the whole thing again. And then I came back and I was enthusiastic. And I should say, over Christmas, I even spent a while looking at Escalades, because ultimately for the towing that I want, an Escalade with 400 horsepower and that 6.2, it's the luxury interior. But I kind of want to do like off-roady stuff. And my son's like, truck, not SUV, truck, not SUV. And, you shouldn't be influenced by that, but like, obviously I am. But he was also like, no Toyota. So, I thought of Tundras because they are so like, because everyone knows they have their value and they're bulletproof and, a million, UN relief agencies and Mujahideen and, I can't be wrong kind of thing. There is that element, about them. Yeah, I mean, and that morning where I was going to drive that Chevy and then look at this one, I was just like, the Chevy was 2 years newer at 140,000 miles. This Tundra I've got is a 2016, not an 18. It has 198 when I bought it. And just a word on that, right? You see them advertised with 300 plus. This is a one owner, clean Carfax truck. There's a lot of them like that, right? I was looking at 3 that were like that within 500 miles of San Francisco here. So I didn't want to go as far, right? And this what happened was I just had like a rush of blood to the head where I was like, the problem with these, what it is we went to visit friends up in Napa. They had like a party at their house up in Healdsburg. Lovely spread by vineyard. And as we're driving up there, I'm thinking, would I be happy driving that dual wheel Ram with its? I looked at one dual wheel Ram that was it had been used on a ranch in the Dakotas, and it had like a great big bull bar on it. Like a high bull bar, so it had high ground clearance. And as we're like rocking up at their nice little place, at their nice little house, and there's all these fucking Teslas and hybrid fucking Toyotas parked up. I'm like, I don't want to cause offense. I never did. I always loved heavy metal, but I never wanted to have the Overkill t-shirt with fuck you on it, not least because I didn't like Overkill, because I never felt like that. I never wanted to be like, this Ram would be too much of a, and I don't even mean like I mean a modern one with that big grill on and the dual wheels. All of it is too much. And if it can't be used for that kind of excursion from the city, which the BMW is too long in the tooth for, and the Mercedes is too knackered for, and the Fiesta is just too much of an asshole on any long journey for, because it's like Healdsburg's, like an hour and a bit away, and we're going to be driving back late at night, by the pool. Maybe if I've had a few beers too many, Dana needs to drive. Again, the Fiesta, not an option there, because it's a stick, right? This guy, he's just fine. So fundamentally, these Tundras, they're like Land Cruisers with tailgates on. You can get them with basically like a BMW 7 Series backseat or a BMW 3 Series backseat. The 3 Series ones they call double cabs, and they've got like an Alpha 156 hidden in the B pillar, hidden in the C pillar kind of door handle. And, enough room for like a non-American sized adult in the back. And the Crewmax is the name of the ones with like the big rear in them. And they're basically like Suburbans. Like you've got a lot of room in the back, especially the high trim ones with like the leather. The high trim Tundra is called the 1794. How cheesy is that? I mean, if you don't know the Ford King Ranch, the 1794 seems pretty cheesedick until you know the Ford King Ranch, and the King Ranch is my word. Like, I like him because I don't take myself seriously, but I mean, look at photos online. The interiors on King Ranches particularly are just bloody incredible. Well, so the Limited is the one down from the full like chintz of the 1794. There was a 1794 for sale, right? Similar miles, newer, at a Toyota dealership as well, but like $5,000 more. And I'm like, you know what? I don't need the I mean, the one I've got's got a backup camera on it, which is bloody useful. Like, I never thought I'd say that, but it's really useful because I'm not used to the length of it. So I can just back up and Anyway, so that probably was going somewhere there, but I've completely lost my train of thought. I dare say the second coffee is wearing off, and now I'm going to just move on to my actual agenda and logistics here of what I was going to talk about with it. So, so this was the process, right? So I looked at, so I was off the Rams because I was just like, they're not practical. I need something that can at least, we could use for like a visit to see friends at the weekend, or, if literally if we go and see those friends of ours down in Santa Barbara, and they've moved there permanently now, literally, right, the Super Duty would look like workmen were visiting. Every F-250 Super Duty you see is a work vehicle. It has a rack. It's a work vehicle, right? I'd look like I was a workman. The Ram wouldn't fit through the gates of the place into the little courtyard, right? And if it did, you couldn't turn it round properly and all that. The Tundra, it fits. The Tundra looks all right, on the school run amongst the Teslas and the Hondas, it fits. It's, that. So I feel like it is a really good compromise. So anyway, so I looked at this Crewmax. That's what I was talking about before, wasn't I? I was talking about the Crewmax and the double cab having the hidden door, the Crewmax having the full like suburban back seat. Well, I looked at this black Crewmax one. I guess there's this special dark package that they do. I had special. All it was like stickers and wheels. But this truck was a Texas truck. It was one owner, clean Carfax. I looked at it. It's this scuzzy, like the scuzziest, most Arthur Daly used car lot I've ever been to in Sacramento. So I drove up to Sacramento. And I'm looking at this truck, and my first thought when I walked up to it was dinged to fuck. And if I think about that, if I think it's dinged, I think the paint is bad. If I notice that, Jesus, the paint must have been bad, right? And yes, full service history, clean Carfax, all of that, right? But the 20,000 mile service I remember was done at 23,000 and change miles. And I'm just like, wow, that was his first real service. And the bloke was like 3 and a few thousand miles late. And then you look at the interior of it. And that was the first one I'd driven. When I drove this one in Clovis, the one that I bought, it just felt newer, right? It'd done I guess that other one had done 192. Right, I have to, these are eye-popping mileages. I watch Car UK Lee in these crappy like Hyundais and Kias and Vauxhall Corsas and this like 1 litre crap, $5,000 crap that he deals in. This stuff is done at like 100 or 120 or 130,000 miles. But I guess it's a long time since I first surfed Copart and noticed that all of the cars with more than 200,000 miles on them were either Hondas or Toyotas or a few BMWs and Mercedes. But that the BMWs and Mercedes, the person spent an arm and a leg keeping them going. And you looked at these Toyotas and Hondas, they were Camrys, they were Accords, they were wearing 250,000 miles, and the interiors were fine. And friend of mine, Mark Newton, who's I think on one of the early, he is on one of the early episodes. I don't know which number it is. I can't remember what we called it. But he always says about Toyotas, he's a trained Toyota mechanic. He always says it's only when you beat on them, and I mean really beat on them, that then you understand the difference. So this truck I bought, 198,000 miles, split in the driver's seat, bit of dirt on the shifter, bit of dirt on the armrest. Bed has clearly been used, probably got a new tailgate on it, bit of paint on the side. But underneath, I mean, it looks like a vehicle that's less than a year old if you're used to looking at vehicles on the East Coast or in England or in Germany or anywhere where they sold the roads. It's just clean as you like underneath. Yeah, so this Sacramento one, sorry, I'm jumping around here. The Sacramento one. So I'm looking at it. My first thought was dinged up. Loved this black package that it had on it. It had like blacked out grill and kind of cheesy wheels, but you can fix that easily, can't you? Bloke doesn't even come out and speak to me. So I walk in the shack, and it is a shack. And it's like, and the other thing I should say is that it is balls hot. It's like, 110 degrees, right? And I've driven like the 2 hours up to find him. So we talked for a little bit, and he's not stood up from his desk, and I say, can I do it for a test drive? I talked to him on the phone a little bit, but he'd been monosyllabic then as well. He didn't not English as a first language, and anyway, long and short, I get the keys in my hand. He tells me to go right, and right away from the dealership, and I'm like, yeah, no. So I roll away from the dealership, like making sure the truck's going to heat up properly, somewhere where I can, do a proper brake test, all of that. I lay on the ground and looked after. I mean, but it's too bloody hot to lie on the tarmac. Right? That's the thing with it, right? So looking at this truck properly was not easy, but I feel like I managed it. It was sound, right? But I knew that the grey one that I ended up buying was it just felt like that was more of what Rabbit Pitts, what Rob Pitts, the Rabbit, rest in peace, Rabbit. You were a great storyteller. What old Rabbit would describe as a pawpaw truck. It had the feel of a pawpaw truck. When I was on the test drive with the Toyota guy, I was like, "What's that?" There's a button on the under the driver mirror there, and I was like, "What's that button that goes?" And it's worn away. I was like, "What was that button there?" And he went, "Oh, it's obviously been kept in a garage because that's the button for like the button that's built into the car for the remote garage opener." I mean, yeah. So so I had considered other things. I mean, I did there was a morning where I booked to go and look at an F-250, and then the morning was just like, no, I just can't do the work truck with the long wheelbase, which, it just would have been ridiculous for, this Tundra is pretty ridiculous as it is, but I feel like, so I've touched all the bases. I've got something which can tow all of my shit and won't need any maintenance and fits anywhere and fits into the background anywhere, especially in California. Awesome. That's what I wanted. It's superb to drive. It just works for me. My wife described it as not embarrassing, and we're using it for the school camping trip, which I'm meant to be packing for as I'm prattling now. And the boy's happy because I've got a truck and I've stopped talking about it. He keeps opening and closing the tailgate and leaping up into it and climbing over into the bed by standing on the wheel, which, is scratching the side of it. But you know what I mean? I'm like, whatever. And that is the thing with it, right? That's the other thing about getting a Toyota is not only is it this bulletproof reliability, but I'm not sad watching it sit out in the street and rust away. I'm like, whatever, I don't. It's Toyota, And the reality is, even with 100,000 more miles on it, it'll still be worth. There are T100s with 350,000 miles on them from the mid '90s that were on Craigslist and OfferUp and Facebook for $5,000 and $7,000 because they're in clean condition. And that's it's the value hold. So the dealership was down in Clovis. So I drove down there in the Mercedes, balls hot, along Highway 152, super picturesque, really enjoyable drive. And not much to report, really. I mean, I looked round it, stupidly forgot to look under the hood before we got out on the test drive, and I never did look. I didn't look under the hood until we got back to the dealership. But I was when I noticed it had paint on the door, and thought that it probably had a new tailgate or paint on the tailgate. That set me worrying that it had been hit. And so I spent a long time in the shade rolling around underneath it, trying to see if it had, convincing myself that it hadn't basically been hit inside. The test drive, I mean, weird, right? Because we get up on this highway, on this concrete highway, and it's pulling to one side. And I'm like, the fucking thing's pulling. And the dude's like, yeah, they all do that. And I'm thinking, that sounds like their worst fucking line. They all do that. The test drive route right from the dealership has trucks pulling, and, you know, that's meant to be like, you know. But yeah, it seems that it is. For the first 500 miles I drove the truck, because after that first piece of freeway it didn't pull again, but for the first 500 miles I drove the truck. Anytime it pulled to either side, I was terrified that I'd bought something that had been hit and the frame was twisted. And no, I'm here to tell you, it drives straight as a die. It does have a problem with losing tire pressure on one front tire. Obviously you let that go too low, there is a pull there, but you know, fundamentally thing drives straight. So Toyota of Clovis, change your test drive route, guys. Idiotic test drive route, because your first impression is that the thing's pulling to the right, and it's not. It's a terrible piece of freeway, nothing to do with the truck. You know, literally, it's the road, not the truck. But my word, that did not showcase the truck to its best. That really, I went to bed. I ended up having to stay over in Clovis, and I went to bed in the motel that night thinking, oh, yeah, because I had to pay in the cash in the morning. That's the way that it worked out. So, but I went to bed thinking, God, I hope the thing doesn't pull, and worrying that I hadn't looked under the hood thoroughly. And when I had looked under the hood, it'd been warm, so I couldn't, you know, check the oil properly and all of that. It wasn't warm when I started it, which was great, because you could tell there was nothing, you know, no problem out of the tailpipe. It's been cleaned up under the hood, which is you know, which is fine, right? It had done 200,000 miles. It clearly had a life before. It's got a bed liner in it. Don't know what the bed's like underneath it. Looked not rusty, which is the thing you worry about. But you know, it's like Clovis. It was sold new at that dealership in Clovis. It was serviced there and in Clovis. Had oil changes at another place in Clovis. It had that its whole life. You know, you're like, you are. You know, you're buying a true desert state vehicle with it, or I did. Yeah, so I drove down in the Mercedes, then left the Mercedes at the dealership, took the truck home, and then the following Monday morning scooped up a U-Haul and went back to Clovis, loaded the Mercedes, 116 degrees on the dashboard, loaded the Mercedes, and then drove home. Always on that beautiful Highway 152, do a street view of it past the lakes there, but it's between Gilroy and Highway 5. Super picturesque. And Clovis is nice. It's sort of a nice bit of Fresno, I guess. I didn't realize it was a suburb of Fresno before, but I like Clovis. It's a brick town, which is quite unusual. At the center of it is a brick town, which is really unusual in California. And of course, it speaks to a really old town in California, because it's a town that was clearly built before the 1906 earthquake, when everyone realized, or at least all the recent transplants from other places realized the way that California is with earthquakes, and stopped building out of brick and started building out of things that are more easily and cheaply rebuilt. Yeah, so the drive is awesome, right? It's a beautiful drive. The truck itself, I mean, coming up past the Cliff House here, towing the Mercedes, coming up past the Cliff House home, it kicked down one gear to go from, you know, I was only doing like 25 or 30 miles an hour, but it kicked down one gear to go from like turning over at 1750 RPM to turning over at like 2250 RPM. It really has great power between 3,000 and 4,000 RPM. And I had it towing up a steep grade at 65 miles an hour with the cruise set, and it just did it. If you ask too much of the cruise, it doesn't strain around. It just turns the cruise off, and as you drive it on the throttle. On the descent, it went down a gear or went up a gear. What would it be? It would be whatever. It changed ratios to use engine braking to keep it at 65 miles an hour in a beautiful, controlled kind of way. I don't mean 65 miles an hour, by the way, U-Haul. I mean 55 miles an hour. I mean, at no point did I exceed 55 miles an hour while towing, for the purposes of, because that's the limit with U-Haul equipment, believe it or not, which means that you're being passed by the 18-wheelers and so on. And but I quite enjoy just pottering. I'm fine with that, and I have every reason to believe that it would tow with stability at speeds far beyond that 55 miles an hour that I just mentioned. Not that I indulged in any of that activity because, of course, the equipment was new to me. I've positioned it up there that it moved quite smoothly through, but really there was whenever you buy a car, there's always hassle, and you have to see one person, you have to see another person, and then you have to wait until the bank opens in the morning. And if I'd have brought a checkbook, I wouldn't have needed to, that kind of thing. So I could have prepared better. And I prepared myself to think very clearly about the truck, but I hadn't prepared myself for anything that happened after that, in terms of how to pay for it and all of that, so that I skillfully. So I found it surprisingly familiar, actually, and have found it surprisingly familiar in that, I did spend that summer working as hot air balloon crew, where the vehicles, there was a Peugeot 504 station wagon and Citroen C35 vans that Gammy and I have talked about in another of these pods, but we there were also 3 Toyota pickup trucks, basically first generation Tacomas. They weren't badged as that because it was in Europe, but that's what they were. Early 90s Tacomas and 4x4s, Super manual transmission, 5-speed manuals, and Previas. We used to race the Previas. They do 118 miles an hour flat out with the overdrive off, only 115 with the overdrive on, allegedly. So I was familiar with the trucks, but at that point, obviously Mark Newton swears by them. John Garcia has had a gold one for years, which is a manual transmission 2001, and it's trebled in value since when he first bought it. It was like a $5,000 5-year-old pickup truck, and now it's manual transmission, 4-wheel drive, 4-cylinder, bulletproof spec kind of thing, in nice condition. So it's like a $10,000 truck now. Yeah, and a surprisingly different vehicle, although similar in feel to mine. I mean, mine feels like a Land Cruiser, and it is sized like a domestic US pickup truck, and that's really what appealed to me about it. Here is a domestic US pickup truck, domestic in every sense, the 350 cubic inch, normally aspirated V8, the automatic transmission, the bed that's big enough to fit a Harley. You'd think I was talking about a Chevy or a Ford or a Ram, wouldn't you? But now you're going to ally that with this bulletproof build quality, which, you might say, oh, it's not so bulletproof now. No, but the value proposition is that it's bulletproof. And what I didn't realize, the value, the reputation is that, so they hold their value. Toyotas hold their value better than anything, better than modern BMW, better than modern Mercedes, because everyone knows they're complicated and fragile. That's the other thing to say about this, is that the Fords with their turbos, or even the Ford motor, it's a 5-litre. The V8 motor is the Mustang motor. It's a 5-litre that makes 400 horsepower now. Well, the Chevy's a 5.3 that makes 335. That tells you how much less stress the Chevy motor is. The Ram has a 5.7. I don't know what horsepower that makes. I just wouldn't do a Ram that wasn't like a dually for build quality. Again, right, this is a mark against, somehow I could forgive Chrysler build quality for, if I was going to get the dual wheel, no, right, just do this Toyota. It's never going to go wrong. The moment I sat in it, and it just looked like a truck that had done 20,000 miles or 40,000 miles, not one that had done nearly 200. I mean, yeah, it's that was what sold me on it. So I did visit the Toyota factory. It was like Stalingrad. The state renamed the community Toyota, the community where the factory was located, Toyota. I can't remember the full details. I mean, it's Toyota family, Toyota family. Um, Toyota's more easily pronounced in Europe and America, so that's why they did that. It's also something to do with the syllables and being lucky in Japanese. I learned all of this on the guided tour I had of Toyota Town. And I say it's like Stalingrad because, the community was named after this entity which is going to rebuild the community, or in the case of Stalingrad, stop the advance. Sewing machine, British sewing machine patent. I remember that was how Toyota made their money. That they did all these sewing machines, and then with the money that they made from that, they bought the patent out, and the money they made from that, they pivoted to making cars. And that was when the Toyota renaming took place. That was post-war, 1950, something like that. Of course, it was post-war because they needed to rebuild. So this is the essence of Toyota. So you may know that story about Soichiro Honda, that when the Model T comes to Honda's village for the first time, it drops some oil, that first Model T. And he goes into the street after it's gone and he dips his finger in the oil and he tastes it. You were a Honda racing engineer for Honda motorcycles. When Honda-san came to the track, when the boss man came to the track, if your bike wasn't the fastest one down the straight, that was a great dishonor and you felt in danger of your job because Honda engines were the most powerful, and that was what he expected. That's Honda, right? This Formula One history with Senna, all of that. Toyota's none of that. Toyota's rebuild the nation. And that's why there's no thought of how to, make the car good to drive or fast or anything like that. Why would you do that? You buy machine tools. Who are the best? Mercedes-Benz, right? We buy machine tools from Mercedes-Benz. How are they styling their cars? All like this. They've gone to a two-blob headlight style like my E55. Well, the next GS 300 has exactly the same two-blob headlight style, even though it's to this day looks a bit ungainly. I personally like it, right? But it's definitely an acquired taste, and Toyota and Lexus in that case just unashamedly copy that. Lexus LS 400 was a straight copy of the Mercedes S-Class of that era. They were shameless about delivering what they were going to deliver, and this is what with the pickup truck, you're just like, I just want it not to go wrong. I want it, and it's curious. There are elements of the design which remind you of Ford because it's cheap feeling, but it's like the materials are Ford grade, but the build quality is Mercedes, in the 80s. It's this bulletproof screwed together of cheap materials, and it really reflects in this truck, and it's why I bought it. I did indulge in a little bit of high four around some, I stopped for a pee. Because, of course, that's the other thing that's awesome about it. Everywhere you go, there's a urinal, right? You just park at the side of the road, walk around the truck, open the passenger door, there's your urinal. Like, it just rules, that truck. Anyway, well, I did that at the side of the road, and then I was like, this was obviously not when I was telling this, when I was driving it home. I was like, you know what? I'll just do a lap of this little, fruit section here. There was a wide path there. So I had it in two-wheel drive, bit of Dukes of Hazzard. I had it in high four for a little bit. I only did about 40, 50 miles an hour. I'm going to have to find somewhere to do that properly. Really good traction. Truck felt really, really good. Haven't tested low four yet. To jump back to the day of the pickup. So it took me like 4 hours to get down there. So it's like heat of the day, like early afternoon. By the time I'm loading, because I made sure I had like food and water before, because it's this bloody 116 degrees. Of course, it's California. So all the shady parts have got like homeless people in their tents living in, which is fair enough, right? They got nowhere else to go. They wouldn't fucking be there if they could be anywhere else, would they? So I'm not knocking them for that. But it means that I'm out in the middle of the Home Depot car park, taking up 2 parking spaces, loading up. Putting the axles, putting the chains over the axles. I was lying on the ground for a little bit and then having to shift my shoulder position because the tarmac is too fucking hot to lie on. So, of course, didn't bring gloves, stupidly. I brought tools and everything, but didn't think to bring gloves. My hands are absolutely filthy because the Mercedes is obviously is 160,000 miles of leaking power steering and oil and, so there's some of my hands filthy from all of that, from sorting out, the differentials leaking a little. So I'm covered from, that was at the back and at the front. Anyway, so I go in the Home Depot to, use the loo, right? Well, it's being cleaned. Just 2 dudes in line already. We're all fidgety. We all need to go. So I'm trying to go in the ladies, but the door keeps closing before I can get in, and we're not allowed to know the code. So anyway, so that was drama. That was 5 or 6 of us eventually demanded that we be allowed into the ladies, and I just went ahead and did what I needed to do, and of course made a massive mess of the sink. Washing all the crap off my hands after I'd peed out all the Gatorade that I'd been drinking to keep my strength up. So yeah, and then the scenic route home, towing. As I say, it's absolutely beautiful sunset that evening. I remember towing, and it tows on cruise, just absolutely no problem at all. So really sort of made up with the purchase. The family are happy with it as well. It's just the icing on the cake. So that's how I ended up with a Tundra. Thank you, drive through.
This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.